You're dead to this family. All because I refused to abandon the only person who had no one left. My little brother. The day I signed the adoption papers, I lost my parents. They erased my number, told our relatives to stay away from me, and acted like I had never existed. For an entire year, I believed I'd never hear their voices again. Then, out of nowhere, my phone rang. It was my father. The same man who had disowned me. Was crying. And the words that came out of his mouth changed everything. Please, we need your help. After everything they'd done to me, I had one question running through my mind. Should I help the people who abandoned me, or let them live with the choice they made? The brother I could never leave behind. People always assume that becoming a parent is something you plan for. You finish school, build a career, find the right person, buy a house, and then, maybe, you have children. That wasn't my story. I became a parent at 26 because I had no other choice. Before I tell you why my parents disowned me, you need to understand one thing. I never wanted to fight my family. I loved them. Growing up, I believed we were close. My dad was strict but hardworking. My mom cared deeply about what other people thought, always trying to make our family look perfect from the outside. But behind closed doors, things were different. There was a 12-year age gap between me and my little brother, Ethan. By the time he was born, I was already in high school. I wasn't excited at first. Like most teenagers, I thought a crying baby would only make life more annoying. I couldn't have been more wrong. The first time Mom placed him in my arms, he wrapped his tiny fingers around mine. I still remember Dad laughing and saying, "Looks like you've got a shadow now." He was right. From that day on, Ethan followed me everywhere. If I was playing video games, he wanted to sit beside me. If I was outside shooting hoops, he'd drag his tiny basketball across the driveway just to copy me. Whenever he had nightmares, he didn't run to our parents. He came to me. As the years passed, I wasn't just his older brother anymore. I became his favorite person. I taught him how to ride a bike. Helped him with homework. Cheered louder than anyone at his school events. When kids bullied him for being shy, I was the one who picked him up after school and reminded him that being kind wasn't weakness. He trusted me with everything. Looking back now, maybe that's why what happened later hurt him even more than it hurt me. After college, I moved about 40 minutes away for work. It wasn't far enough to lose touch. Every weekend, Ethan begged me to visit. Sometimes we'd spend hours building Lego sets. Sometimes we'd watch superhero movies until midnight. Sometimes we'd just order pizza and talk about life. Those weekends became the best part of both our lives. What I didn't realize was that while Ethan and I were getting closer, something inside our family was quietly falling apart. And by the time I finally saw the cracks, it was already too late. The day everything started falling apart. If you had asked me back then whether my family was happy, I would have answered without hesitation. Yeah, we're fine. It's funny how easy it is to mistake silence for peace. Looking back now, all the warning signs were there. I just didn't know how to read them. A few months after I moved into my apartment, my mom started calling me more often than usual. At first, I thought she simply missed me. She'd ask how work was going, whether I was eating properly, and if I was saving enough money. But almost every conversation ended the same way. "So, when are you coming home?" I always laughed and said, "This weekend." Sometimes I did. Sometimes work got in the way. Whenever I visited, Ethan was always waiting by the front window. The second my car pulled into the driveway, he'd sprint outside before I even turned off the engine. "You came." He'd throw his arms around me like we'd been apart for years instead of a couple of weeks. Those hugs made every mile worth driving. We had our own little traditions. Every Saturday morning we'd walk to the diner a few blocks away. He always ordered pancakes with way too much syrup. I always complained he was going to get sick. He always ignored me. Then we'd spend the afternoon at the park or playing basketball. He wasn't very good. Actually, he was terrible. But every time he finally made a shot, he'd look at me with the biggest smile, waiting for my approval. I'd cheer like he'd just won the NBA Finals. Those moments were simple. Normal. The kind of memories you never realize you're making until they're all you have left. One Saturday, while Ethan was upstairs playing video games, I walked into the kitchen to grab a drink. That's when I heard my parents arguing. Not the kind of argument couples usually have. This was different. Their voices were low. Sharp. Almost desperate. "You can't keep hiding this forever," my mom whispered. "We don't have another choice," Dad answered. I said, "We'll figure something out." I froze. I'd never heard my father sound scared before. He was the kind of man who always had an answer. Always had a plan. But that day, he sounded like someone who was running out of both. When they noticed me standing there, the conversation stopped instantly. Mom forced a smile. "Everything okay?" I nodded. "Yeah, just getting some water." Dad looked relieved that I didn't ask questions. I wish I had. Because maybe, just maybe, everything that happened afterward could have been different. Over the next few weeks, Ethan started acting differently too. He became quieter. More nervous. One afternoon, while we were throwing a football around in the backyard, he suddenly asked me something that caught me completely off guard. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." If Mom and Dad ever disappeared." He hesitated. "Would you still take care of me?" I laughed. "What kind of question is that?" He didn't laugh back. "I'm serious." I knelt so we were eye to eye. "Nothing's going to happen to Mom and Dad." "But if it did?" I looked into his eyes. He wasn't asking out of curiosity. He was asking because he was afraid. I smiled anyway. "Yeah. I'd always take care of you. No matter what. No matter what." The moment those words left my mouth, I unknowingly made the biggest promise of my life. A promise I would eventually have to keep. A few days later, my mom called me while I was at work. Her voice sounded tired. "Can you come over this weekend?" "Sure." "Is everything okay?" There was a long pause. Then she said something that didn't make sense at the time. "I just want us all to be together." When I arrived that Saturday, the house felt different. No TV. No music. No smell of Mom cooking dinner. The curtains were closed even though it was the middle of the afternoon. Dad sat silently at the dining table with a stack of papers in front of him. Mom looked like she hadn't slept in days. Ethan sat on the couch hugging his backpack. No one spoke for almost a full minute. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. "We've been dealing with some financial problems." I frowned. "What kind of problems?" He exchanged a quick glance with Mom. "The business isn't doing well." That surprised me. As far as I knew, his construction company had always been successful. "So what happens now?" I asked. "We'll manage," he said quickly. "It'll just take some time." Something about the way he answered didn't sit right with me. He wasn't telling me everything. I could feel it. Still, I didn't push. I figured if they wanted me to know more, they'd tell me. That was my mistake. Sometimes the people you love hide the truth because they're trying to protect you. Other times, they hide it because they know the truth will change everything. As I was leaving that evening, Ethan walked me to my car. Before I got in, he reached into his pocket and handed me a small folded piece of paper. "Don't read it until you get home." I smiled. "What is it?" "You'll see." The entire drive home, I kept wondering what could possibly be inside. When I finally parked and unfolded the note, only one sentence was written in shaky handwriting. "If something happens, please don't let them send me away." I read it once. Then again. Then a third time. My heart started pounding. I had no idea what Ethan meant. But for the first time in my life, I was terrified that something was about to happen to my family. And I was right. The phone call that changed everything. I didn't sleep that night. No matter how many times I read Ethan's note, it didn't make any sense. "If something happens, please don't let them send me away." Send him away where? To a relative? A boarding school? Foster care? The more I thought about it, the less I understood. I almost called my parents, but I convinced myself I was overreacting. Maybe Ethan had seen something on TV. Maybe one of his friends at school had scared him with a story. Kids imagine terrible things all the time. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. But deep down, I knew that note hadn't come from imagination. It came from fear. For the next week, I called Ethan every evening after work. The first couple of conversations sounded normal. He told me about a science project he was working on. He complained about math homework. He even laughed while telling me that his basketball coach still wouldn't let him play point guard. It almost made me forget about the note. Almost. Then, on Thursday night, something changed. "Hey, buddy," I said after he answered. There was no excitement in his voice. "Hi. You okay?" "Yeah. You don't sound okay." A long silence followed. Then I heard him whisper, "They're fighting again." I looked at the clock. It was almost 11 at night. "What are they fighting about?" "I don't know." Another pause. "But they're yelling really loud." I could hear muffled voices in the background. Then something crashed. It sounded like glass breaking. "Ethan? I'm here. Go to your room and lock the door." "Okay. And keep your phone with you." "Okay. I'll call Mom." He hesitated before answering. "She won't pick up." "What do you mean?" "She never does when they're like this." A knot formed in my stomach. "I'll be there as soon as I can." "It's 40 minutes away." "I know." I grabbed my keys and rushed out the door. The entire drive, I kept calling my parents. Dad didn't answer. Mom didn't answer. Every voicemail made my anxiety worse. By the time I reached the house, the lights were off. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. I jumped out of the car and ran to the front door. Locked. I knocked. No answer. I knocked harder. Still nothing. Then I saw the patrol car parked across the street. An officer stepped out and walked toward me. "Can I help you?" "My parents live here." He looked at me for a moment before asking. "You're their oldest son?" "Yeah." His expression changed. "I was actually looking for you." My heart dropped. "What happened?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked me to sit down on the front steps. No one asks you to sit down before giving good news. I knew that much. "There was an accident," he finally said. My ears started ringing. "What kind of accident?" He explained that earlier that evening, my parents had been driving back from a meeting with their financial advisor. A truck had crossed into their lane during heavy rain. The collision was devastating. Mom had died before the ambulance arrived. Dad was taken to the hospital in critical condition. For a few seconds, I couldn't hear anything else. His lips kept moving, but every word sounded distant. It felt like the world had suddenly become silent. Then one thought hit me harder than everything else. Ethan. I looked at the officer. Where's my brother? He was at home when emergency services arrived. And now? He was taken into temporary protective custody until a legal guardian can be identified. Protective custody. Those two words echoed in my head. I remembered the note. Please don't let them send me away. He knew. Somehow. He knew this could happen. I rushed to the hospital, hoping my dad could tell me what was going on. When I finally saw him, he barely looked conscious. Machines surrounded his bed. His face was covered in bruises. For the first time in my life, my father looked small. Weak. Scared. When he noticed me standing there, tears filled his eyes. He reached for my hand with what little strength he had left. I'm sorry. Those were the first words he said. Not, how's Ethan? Not, how are you? Just, I'm sorry. I didn't even know what he was apologizing for. Dad, don't talk. Just rest. He shook his head. No. You have to promise me. His breathing became heavier. You have to protect your brother. I will. No matter what anyone says. I squeezed his hand. I promise. His eyes closed. The monitors continued to beep steadily. I thought everything would somehow work itself out. I thought once Dad recovered, we'd figure everything out together. I had no idea that within the next 48 hours, lawyers, social workers, and members of my own family would completely change my life. Because while I was mourning my mother and praying for my father to survive, everyone else was already deciding what should happen to Ethan. And according to them, I wasn't part of that plan. You're too young to raise him. The funeral was only 3 days later. Looking back, I barely remember it. People always say funerals bring families together. In my case, it did the exact opposite. The church was packed. Relatives I hadn't seen in years suddenly appeared, hugging me, telling me how sorry they were. Some cried. Some prayed. Others stood in small groups, whispering to each other whenever they thought I wasn't looking. I hated every second of it. Because while everyone else was mourning my mother, all I could think about was Ethan. He wasn't sitting beside me. He wasn't holding my hand. He wasn't even allowed to attend the service until a social worker approved it. He was 11 years old. And he had already become a legal case. That thought made me sick. After the funeral, everyone gathered at my parents' house. The same house where Ethan had learned to ride his bike. The same house where we'd celebrated birthdays, Christmas mornings, and countless family dinners. Now it felt cold. Almost unrecognizable. People walked through the living room carrying plates of food and cups of coffee, talking about insurance policies, funeral expenses, and legal paperwork as if they were discussing the weather. No one talked about Ethan. No one except me. So, I finally said, looking around the room, "Who's bringing Ethan home?" The conversation stopped. My Aunt Linda looked down at her coffee. Uncle Mark cleared his throat. My grandmother slowly shook her head. Then my father's older brother, Uncle Richard, spoke. "The state is still evaluating the situation." I frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means they'll decide what's best for him." "No." I looked him straight in the eye. "I'll decide what's best for him." Several relatives exchanged uncomfortable glances. Richard sighed. "It isn't that simple." Actually, it is. I'll take him. Silence. Complete silence. It lasted several seconds before someone laughed. Not because they thought I was joking. Because they thought I was being naive. Richard leaned back in his chair. You live in a one-bedroom apartment. So? You work full-time. I'll make it work. You've never raised a child. I'll learn. Every excuse they gave. I answered. Then Aunt Linda finally asked the question they had all been thinking. Why would you throw your life away? I stared at her. Throw my life away? She quickly tried to soften her words. That's not what I meant. No. It is. I stood up. He's my brother. I know. Then why is everyone acting like he's a burden instead of family? No one answered. Because they couldn't. The truth was painfully obvious. Everyone loved Ethan. As long as someone else was responsible for him. That realization broke something inside me. A few hours later, I met with the social worker assigned to Ethan's case. Her name was Ms. Carter. She seemed kind, but professional. She spread several folders across the table before looking at me. So. You want to become Ethan's guardian? I do. Tell me why. The question caught me off guard. Because he's my brother. She nodded politely. I understand. But legally, that's not enough. She asked about my income. My apartment. My work schedule. Health insurance. Savings. Emergency contacts. Every answer I gave seemed to create two new questions. By the end of the meeting, I felt like I had just taken the hardest exam of my life. Before I left, she stopped me. I need you to understand something. What? This process isn't emotional. It's legal. If another family member can provide a more stable environment, they'll be considered first. I looked at her. Do any of them even want him? She didn't answer. That was answer enough. The next morning, I finally saw Ethan. He was staying in a temporary children's home until the court made a decision. The moment he saw me, he ran across the room and wrapped his arms around me so tightly I could barely breathe. I knew you'd come. I hugged him back. I'm sorry it took so long. He refused to let go. For almost a full minute, neither of us said anything. Then he quietly asked the question I had been dreading. Can I come home with you? I closed my eyes. I wish you could. His grip tightened. They're going to send me somewhere else, aren't they? No. I won't let that happen. You promise? I remembered the promise I'd made in the backyard. No matter what. I promise. For the first time since Mom's accident. He smiled. A small smile. But it was enough. As I walked out of the building, my phone started ringing. The caller ID showed Dad's hospital. I answered immediately. Hello? A weak voice came through the speaker. It was my father. I need to see you. When? As soon as possible. His voice sounded different. Not just weak. Defeated. I drove straight to the hospital, expecting him to tell me how to bring Ethan home. Instead, he told me something that made my blood run cold. Something he'd been hiding from all of us for years. And the moment I heard the truth, I finally understood why my family was so desperate to stop me from adopting my little brother. The secret my father took too long to tell me. I barely made it to the hospital before visiting hours ended. The entire drive, my mind kept replaying Ethan's face. That look in his eyes when he asked if he could come home with me. No kid should ever have to ask that question. especially not after losing his mother. When I reached Dad's room, he looked even worse than he had a few days earlier. The bruises on his face had darkened. His left arm was wrapped in a cast. Every breath seemed to hurt. For a moment, I almost turned around. This wasn't the father I grew up with. This wasn't the man who could build an entire house with his own hands or fix anything that broke. He looked broken. He motioned for me to close the door. I pulled a chair next to his bed. "You said you needed to tell me something." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared out the window. "I've made a lot of mistakes." I sighed. "Dad, you don't have to." "Yes. I do." His voice cracked. "For years. I kept telling myself I was protecting this family. But I wasn't. I was protecting my pride." I stayed quiet. He needed to say whatever had been weighing on him. "Our business. It didn't fail because of bad luck. It failed because of me." That surprised me. Dad had always blamed the economy. Bad contracts. Rising material costs. Anything except himself. What happened? He swallowed hard. "I trusted the wrong people." "A partner?" He nodded. "I signed papers I shouldn't have signed." He disappeared. "And the debt became mine." "How much debt?" He looked away. "Almost $800,000. I felt the air leave my lungs. 800,000. That wasn't just debt. That was financial ruin. I kept borrowing money to keep the company alive. Then I borrowed more to pay back the first loans. And eventually, I couldn't keep pretending. Everything suddenly made sense. The late-night arguments. The closed curtains. The fear in Mom's voice. Even Ethan's strange behavior. He had been living in a house where the adults were drowning. Children notice more than we think. They were going to take the house, Dad whispered. The cars. Everything. "So why didn't you tell me?" He smiled sadly. "Because fathers aren't supposed to fail." I didn't know what to say. For the first time in my life. I pitied him. Then his expression changed. "There's something else." My stomach tightened. "What?" He looked directly into my eyes. "After the accident. The bank froze almost everything. There isn't much left." "I know." "No. You don't. The life insurance won't cover the debts. The house will be sold. And Ethan." He couldn't finish the sentence. I already knew. Without a stable home or legal guardian, Ethan would remain in the system until someone took responsibility for him. "I'll adopt him." Dad closed his eyes. "I was hoping you'd say that." I frowned. "Hoping?" "I already signed the paperwork." "What paperwork?" He pointed toward the bedside drawer. Inside was a sealed envelope. My name was written across the front. Hands shaking, I opened it. Inside were copies of legal documents. Medical directives. Emergency guardianship forms. And one handwritten letter. The letter began with 6 words. "If you're reading this, I failed." I stared at the page. Dad continued speaking quietly. "I filled those out months ago. Before the accident. I knew there was a chance everything would fall apart. You chose me. There was never anyone else." Tears filled my eyes. "But the rest of the family. They don't know." I didn't tell them. "Why?" "Because they would have fought me. And after I'm gone. They still might." A heavy silence filled the room. Then he reached for my hand. "You made me a promise." "I know. Promise me again. I will take care of Ethan. No matter what. No matter what. A small smile appeared on his face. For the first time since I'd arrived. He looked peaceful. Then he whispered something I'll never forget. They'll try to convince you that you're not enough. They're wrong. You've been raising him for years. You just didn't realize it. I couldn't stop the tears anymore. Neither could he. We sat there in silence, father and son, both wishing we'd had this conversation years earlier. When I finally stood to leave, Dad stopped me one last time. There's one person you need to watch. Who? He hesitated. Then quietly said. Your mother's sister. Aunt Linda. My heart skipped. What about her? She doesn't want Ethan. She wants the house. I stared at him in disbelief. The house is being sold. She doesn't know that. She thinks if she becomes Ethan's guardian, she'll control everything. I wanted to believe Dad was wrong. I wanted to believe grief was making him paranoid. But deep down, I knew he wasn't. Because over the next few days, Aunt Linda suddenly became very interested in being part of Ethan's life. Not because she loved him. Because she thought he came with an inheritance. And that was the moment I realized. The biggest fight wasn't going to be against the courts. It was going to be against my own family. Social workers. Insurance agents. Hospital staff. It felt like every person I met had another form for me to sign or another question to answer. How much did I earn? Could I provide health insurance? Did I have a criminal record? Who would watch Ethan while I worked? Could I prove that my apartment was safe for a child? Every answer mattered. One wrong step could cost me my brother. So I treated every meeting like my entire future depended on it. Because it did. A few days later, I got the call I'd been waiting for. The court had scheduled a family hearing. Every close relative who wanted custody of Ethan would have the chance to speak. I wasn't worried. Dad had signed the guardianship papers. Surely that would settle everything. I couldn't have been more wrong. The courtroom wasn't large. It was quiet. Almost intimidating. Ethan sat beside his social worker, nervously swinging his feet beneath the chair. The moment he saw me, he smiled. That smile gave me confidence. No matter what happened today, I wasn't walking away from him. The judge began asking simple questions. Who could provide a stable home? Who had a relationship with Ethan? Who was financially capable? One by one, relatives spoke. Most admitted they weren't in a position to raise another child. Some lived too far away. Others were retired. A few simply didn't volunteer. Then Aunt Linda stood. She wore a black dress and carried herself like she had rehearsed every word. Your Honor, she began softly. Ethan deserves stability. He needs experienced adults. He needs a real family. She paused. And while we all appreciate what my nephew is trying to do, she looked directly at me. He's simply too young. Too young. Those two words echoed through the courtroom. She continued. He works full-time. He lives alone. He's never been married. He's never raised a child. This responsibility is simply too much. I wanted to interrupt. But my lawyer lightly touched my arm. Wait. So I waited. When it was finally my turn, I stood up. My hands were shaking. Not because I was afraid. Because everything depended on what I said next. I agree with one thing. The room became silent. I'm young. Several people looked surprised. But Ethan doesn't need perfect parents. He needs someone who has never left him. I looked toward Ethan. When he had nightmares, he called me. When he learned to ride a bike, I was the one running beside him. When he got bullied, I was the one who picked him up from school. I've spent years being his big brother. I'm simply asking for the chance to keep doing what I've always done. No one spoke. Even Aunt Linda avoided looking at me. Then the judge asked Ethan a question no one expected. Ethan, if you could choose, where would you want to live? The entire courtroom turned toward him. He looked terrified. His hands trembled. For several seconds, he couldn't speak. Then, he slowly stood up, walked across the room, and grabbed my hand. I want my brother. That was it. 5 simple words. But they carried more truth than every speech given that day. I felt his tiny fingers squeeze mine. I squeezed back. The judge quietly nodded. I understand. The hearing ended without a final decision. The court needed time to review everything. Another week. Another week of waiting. Another week of uncertainty. As we walked out of the courthouse, Aunt Linda stopped me. You really think you can do this? I know I can. She smiled. Not kindly. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. I don't need to. I made him a promise. She stepped closer. This isn't about promises. It's about reality. No. I answered. It's about family. She laughed. We'll see. 3 days later, the judge made the decision. I was at work when my lawyer called. You got custody. I froze. What? The court approved the guardianship. For now? No. Full guardianship. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Then I started crying. Right there in the office. I didn't care who saw. After everything. After weeks of fear. Ethan was coming home. The first thing we did was stop for pizza. His favorite. Extra pepperoni. He talked the entire time. About school. About basketball. About wanting a dog someday. It was the first time I'd seen him act like a normal kid since the accident. That night, we unpacked his clothes into the spare room I'd hurriedly created by turning my tiny home office into a bedroom. It wasn't much. A small bed. A desk. A bookshelf. But when he walked inside, his eyes lit up. Is this really mine? It is. He ran over and hugged me. Thank you. I smiled. You don't have to thank me. I do. No. We're family. For the first time in weeks. It felt like maybe everything was finally going to be okay. I was wrong. Because the very next morning, my phone started ringing. It was my mother. I stared at the screen in complete shock. My mother. The woman I'd buried 2 weeks earlier. Then I realized something. It wasn't her phone. It was her old number. Someone else was calling from it. I answered. Before I could even say hello, a cold voice spoke. It was my grandmother. And the first words out of her mouth would destroy what little remained of my family. If you keep that boy, you're dead to this family. I said, if you insist on keeping custody of Ethan, you're no longer part of this family. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because my brain refused to believe it was real. Grandma. Did Aunt Linda put you up to this? This has nothing to do with Linda. It has everything to do with you. I felt my chest tighten. What exactly did I do wrong? You embarrassed this family. I looked around my apartment. Ethan was sitting on the living room floor building a Lego spaceship. Completely unaware that his future was being discussed like a business transaction. I embarrassed the family. By taking care of my little brother? You stole him. Those words hit me harder than I expected. Stole him? He's not a piece of property. He belongs with his blood. I closed my eyes. I am his blood. There was silence on the other end. Then she said something that changed everything. No. You're just a child playing house. I ended the call. Not because I was angry. Because I knew continuing the conversation would accomplish nothing. That evening, the attacks began. First it was text messages. Then phone calls. Then emails. Some came from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Others came from cousins I barely knew. Every message sounded different. But they all carried the same meaning. You're making a mistake. One cousin wrote. Think about your future. Another said. You're wasting the best years of your life. One uncle even told me. You'll resent him eventually. I deleted every message. Not because they didn't hurt. Because I refused to let Ethan ever read them. A week later, the family held what they called a private meeting. I wasn't invited. But I found out anyway. My cousin Jake called me afterward. I thought you should know. What happened? They voted. I frowned. Voted? Yeah. On whether to cut you off. For a moment, I honestly thought he was joking. They actually voted? 23 people. And? He sighed. 20 voted to cut contact. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. 3 people defended me. 20 didn't. Families aren't supposed to work like corporations. You don't vote someone out. At least, I didn't think you could. Apparently, mine did. The official phone call came the next morning. This time, it was my Aunt Linda. I just wanted to let you know. Don't bother coming to Thanksgiving. I laughed bitterly. I wasn't planning on it. And Christmas. Fine. Easter. Okay. Family reunions. Birthdays. Weddings. She paused. Funerals. That last one hurt. More than I expected. So, I asked quietly. You're all really doing this? You made your choice. No. I answered. You made yours. Then I hung up. I expected to feel angry. Instead, I felt empty. 26 years of birthdays. Holiday dinners. Family vacations. Game nights. Barbecues. Sunday lunches. Gone. Just like that. Over a decision I'd never regret. That night, Ethan noticed something was wrong. He looked up from his homework. Are you okay? I forced a smile. Yeah. You look sad. I sat beside him. Can I ask you something? He nodded. If everyone in the world stopped talking to me, would you still think I'm a good brother? He looked confused. Why wouldn't I? I don't know. He thought about it for a second. Then he shrugged. You make pancakes every Saturday. I laughed. You help with homework. You always let me pick the movie. You check for monsters even though you know there aren't any. He smiled. I think that's what good brothers do. My eyes filled with tears. Children have a way of making complicated things simple. To him, love wasn't measured by family approval. It was measured by who showed up. Who stayed. Who kept their promises? Over the next few months, life slowly settled into a routine. Every morning, I'd wake Ethan up for school. He complained about homework. I complained about dirty dishes. We argued over bedtime. We laughed over burnt pancakes. We celebrated when he scored his first basket during a real basketball game. For the first time since the accident, our apartment started feeling like a home. Not because it was big. It wasn't. Not because it was perfect. It definitely wasn't. But because it was ours. One evening, almost exactly 1 year after the day I adopted Ethan, I was helping him with a history project when my phone vibrated. Unknown number. Normally, I ignored unknown numbers. This time, for some reason, I answered. Hello? For several seconds, no one spoke. Then I heard a voice I hadn't heard in over a year. Weak. Broken. Barely recognizable. It was my father. The man everyone had told me was gone from my life forever. He was crying. Please. I don't have anyone else. We need your help. I looked across the room. Ethan was smiling as he colored a poster for school. Completely unaware that the past had just come crashing back into our lives. And in that moment, I realized something. The people who once said I was dead to them had suddenly remembered I was family. The people who buried me were suddenly back. For a long moment, I couldn't say anything. I just stood there with the phone pressed against my ear, trying to understand what I had just heard. My father. After an entire year. The same man whose family had erased me from their lives was calling me for help. I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. Dad? His breathing was slow and uneven. It's really me. I leaned against the kitchen counter. What happened? Before he could answer, I heard another voice in the background. Derek. It was my grandmother. The same grandmother who had looked me in the eye and declared that I was no longer part of the family. Now, she sounded terrified. Please don't hang up. I closed my eyes. The irony wasn't lost on me. A year ago, they wouldn't even answer my calls. Now they were begging me to stay on the line. What do you want? No one answered immediately. Finally, Dad spoke. The bank. They've taken everything. I frowned. What are you talking about? The house. The land. The business. It's all gone. I wasn't surprised. After everything he'd told me in the hospital, I knew the debt was enormous. Still, something didn't add up. If that's all, why are you calling me? Another long silence. Then Dad whispered. Your grandmother is sick. My heart skipped. Sick? Cancer. I felt every emotion inside me collide. Shock. Anger. Confusion. Pity. The woman who had told everyone I no longer existed was now fighting for her life. We just found out, Dad continued. It's aggressive. The treatments are expensive. I slowly looked toward the living room. Ethan was still sitting on the floor. He had no idea the people who abandoned us had suddenly returned. Why me? I asked quietly. You have insurance now. You have savings. You have a stable job. I laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So let me get this straight. You disowned me. You told the entire family I was dead. No one called on my birthday. No one checked on Ethan. No one asked if we needed anything. And now, you need money. No. Dad interrupted. We need you. Those words hit differently. Because for the first time, he didn't ask for cash. He asked for me. But I wasn't ready to believe him. What exactly do you need? Dad took a deep breath. Can we meet? I don't think that's a good idea. Please. I owe you the truth. I almost said no. Every logical part of my brain screamed not to reopen old wounds. But another part of me, the part that still remembered being his son, wanted answers. I'll think about it. Before he could reply, I ended the call. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying every memory from the past year. The courthouse. The insults. The holidays we spent alone. The nights Ethan cried because he missed Mom. Not one member of my family had shown up. Not one. So why now? The next morning, Ethan noticed I looked exhausted. You didn't sleep. I know. Bad dream? Something like that. He poured cereal into his bowl before asking. Was it them? I looked up. What? The family. I froze. How did you know? He shrugged. You only get that look when you're thinking about them. Kids notice everything. Even the things adults try to hide. They called. He stopped eating. What did they want? I don't really know. He looked down at his cereal. After a few seconds, he quietly asked. Are they taking me away? Those words broke my heart. After an entire year. That fear still lived inside him. I immediately reached across the table. No. They can't. They won't. I promised you. He nodded slowly. I know. But promises get broken. I stared at him. Somewhere along the way, an 11-year-old boy had learned not to trust promises. Probably because he'd watched so many adults break theirs. I reached into my wallet and pulled out the folded piece of paper I'd carried every single day for the last year. The note he'd given me before everything fell apart. Please don't let them send me away. I unfolded it and placed it on the table. I've carried this every day. I never forgot. And I never will. Tears filled Ethan's eyes. So? He whispered. You're not leaving? I smiled. Never. He stood up, walked around the table, and hugged me. For a moment. Nothing else mattered. Not the phone call. Not the family. Not the past. Just the promise. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't my father. It was my cousin Jake. Derek. You need to hear this before you decide anything. What happened? They're lying. My stomach tightened. What do you mean? The cancer is real. But that's not why they're calling. What are they hiding? Jake hesitated. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. They're about to lose Grandma's house. And they think you're the only one who can save it. I stood there in complete silence. So this wasn't about family. It wasn't about reconciliation. It wasn't even about forgiveness. It was about money. Again. But Jake wasn't finished. There's something else. What? Aunt Linda has been telling everyone that Ethan inherited something your father hid. I frowned. That's impossible. I know. But she's convinced there's a trust fund. A big one. And she's planning to challenge your adoption in court. I felt my heart start pounding. After everything we'd survived. After an entire year. They still weren't willing to let us live in peace. And this time. They weren't just coming after me. They were coming after my son. Aunt Linda did exactly what Jake warned me she would do. She challenged the adoption. According to her attorney, there were questions about Ethan's inheritance and whether my father had been mentally competent when he signed the guardianship papers. It sounded convincing. Until the facts came out. Dad's attorney produced every document. Medical evaluations. Witness statements. Hospital records. The original guardianship papers. Everything had been signed legally. Everything had been witnessed. Everything was exactly as my father wanted. There was no hidden trust fund. No secret fortune. No valuable property. The only thing my father had left Ethan was me. When the judge dismissed the case, Aunt Linda didn't even look at us. She walked out of the courtroom without saying a word. That was the last time I ever saw her. A few days later, I finally agreed to meet my father. Not because I had forgiven him. Because I needed closure. We met in a quiet coffee shop halfway between our towns. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. He looked older than I remembered. Not just older. Lonelier. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup before quietly saying, "I don't expect forgiveness." I nodded. Good. Because I don't know if I can give it. He accepted my answer without arguing. I deserve that. Then he reached into his jacket and placed a small envelope on the table. I've been carrying this for a year. I opened it. Inside was a single photograph. It was taken years ago. Me. Dad. Mom. And Ethan. We were all covered in flour after trying, and failing, to bake Ethan's birthday cake. I couldn't help smiling. Dad looked at the picture for a long time. That was the last day I remember us being truly happy. So what happened? He sighed deeply. I cared too much about what everyone thought. I let your grandmother and your aunt convince me that you were making a mistake. I should have stood beside you. Instead, I stood behind them. His voice cracked. And I lost my son. For the first time. I saw genuine regret. Not excuses. Not blame. Just regret. I can't change what I did. I know. But I want to know my grandson. I smiled slightly. Your grandson? He nodded. He's your son now. And if he's your son, he's my grandson. Those words stayed with me. Because they were the first honest words he'd spoken in years. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I asked Ethan. Not because I needed permission. Because his feelings mattered more than mine. That evening, we sat on the apartment balcony eating pizza. Our Saturday tradition had never changed. I told him everything. The lawsuit. The meeting. Dad's apology. When I finished, he stayed quiet for a long time. Finally, he asked, "Do you think Grandpa really means it?" I honestly don't know. He nodded. Then he surprised me. I'd like to find out. I looked at him. Are you sure? He smiled. You taught me something. What? Family isn't the people who never make mistakes. It's the people who admit them and try to be better. I couldn't believe those words were coming from a 12-year-old. Sometimes children understand forgiveness better than adults ever will. Over the next several months, things changed slowly. Dad never tried to buy our love. He never asked us to forget the past. Instead, he showed up. He came to Ethan's basketball games. He helped fix things around the apartment. Sometimes we'd have dinner together. Sometimes we'd barely talk. Healing wasn't dramatic. It wasn't one big emotional moment. It was hundreds of small choices. Every single day. Grandma never apologized. Neither did Aunt Linda. Most of the relatives who voted to cut me off never contacted me again. And honestly, that was okay. Because I finally understood something. Being related to someone doesn't automatically make them family. Love does. Loyalty does. Showing up does. Keeping your promises does. A few months before Ethan turned 13, he asked if we could visit Mom's grave. We stood there together in complete silence. After a few minutes, he placed a small basketball keychain on the headstone. His favorite one. Then he looked at me. You know. I think she'd be happy. What makes you say that? He smiled. Because she always wanted me to have someone who'd never leave. Then he wrapped his arms around me. And quietly said the words I'd never expected to hear. Thank you. Dad. I froze. I'd always been his brother. His protector. His guardian. But hearing that word changed something inside me forever. I hugged him tighter than I ever had before. You'll never have to thank me. I made you a promise. And I'll keep it. For the rest of my life. It's been 6 years since the day my parents told me I was dead to them. Today, Ethan is getting ready for college. He's taller than I am. Still terrible at basketball. Still eats too much syrup on his pancakes. Some things never change. People often ask me if I regret adopting him. My answer is always the same. Not for a single second. Because on the day I signed those adoption papers, I thought I was losing my family. The truth was, I wasn't losing one. I was building one. And looking back now, it was the best decision I ever made.